I think that the enemy of this pose done well is the idea that I'm getting my hand to the floor.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it's almost like your hand gets where your hand gets.
Because any range of motion that you can only sustain by a death grip on a block, you are not supporting through your trunk and your hips. You're losing all the value.
So I'm Jane.
I'm Sarah.
And this is the Yoga Posers podcast. Today we're talking about triangle pose, Trikonasana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another famous pose. You're either going to see people doing downward dog or triangle. These are two of the most photographed images. It's like a quintessential classic yoga pose.
It is. And then in this conversation, we're going to be exploring what the, hiccups are, the problems, where people run into trouble, and then the possibilities and the way that this pose can really offer a lot of ability to find strength and balance and the core. It's a really powerful pose. If you're at all curious or you just want to learn more about how to do this pose in a way that serves you, this should be a good episode for that.
Yeah. And this isn't going to be about one way to do a pose. We're not ideologues saying there's only one way to do triangle pose. In fact, it's just the opposite. So
yeah, very much.
Right. Depending on your age, circumstance, abilities, the way your anatomy is set up, the structure of your hips, all of that can affect.
The weather, the day, everything.
Right. We can become sensitive to the things that change our access to complex poses like this. So even though it's a foundational pose, it's a very complex pose. And so it requires teasing apart the different parts of it so we can understand why it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, I love unpacking things. And I was even just working with a client earlier today, and we're going to unpack how the hell she rolls over when she's on the floor. So it's fun to do it, and these things you hadn't really thought could be that complicated. And what's been fun with me doing these poses is we're talking about poses that I never really considered would be a peak pose, like we did this with gate pose. But the more you tease it apart, the more you can make it, the peak pose in the practice. And so triangle is one of those too.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
So I like to come into seeing the pose from a biomechanical lens. I love understanding what are the joints doing, what are the muscles doing. And then Jane, you like to come in from a slightly different perspective.
Yeah. How does this pose serve me from an energetic standpoint? How does it support me?
I hear you talking about how the pose feels when it's right, maybe direction of energy, which could be vayus. You talk about breath and core support a lot.
Yeah.
Pelvic floor awareness. And so these are all sort of the subtle body. Yeah.
I'm more like subtle body gal.
Yeah. And I'm sort of like gross joints, muscles, bones, the actual things.
Stuff you can see and feel.
Which will then will absolutely create the experience of the subtle body.
So very cool. Nice.
Do we like triangle? Do we not like triangle?
You know what? When I first started doing triangle, and the cue was, which we'll talk about later, pretend you're between two panes of glass and you're doing triangle pose. I had so much success in it. I felt really fantastic. And, that's not my experience right now. It changes a lot after hip fracture. That's just not my experience anymore. But I love the pose because it can feel really good. And I like almost like you're on a hamster wheel and then you just continue rotating it and then you get it up in the air and you got half moon. That's really fun. So I do like the feeling of this pose when it's done well, but it needs to me to have everything like all the energy is drawing up and in, right? Versus kind of collapsing down.
Yeah, I've had a mixed relationship with this pose. I generally love it for its long, elegant, lovely lines, and it feels like a very graceful pose when it feels strong. It's taught me a lot about my hips and my sacrum and how when those are misaligned, I will come out of this pose with pain. But I feel like I've mostly in a good place with triangle, although I never underestimate it.
Okay.
So triangle pose has lots of benefits, opportunities for if you'd like to practice this pose. We think that there's good reasons why.
There's so many good triangles to find. I like that.
Right. Where's the triangle?
Where's the triangle? There's a lot of triangles. I like that.
But it's very joint centering when it's done correctly
Yep.
and stabilizing for the hips. And when people say like, oh, I want hip openers, well, the hips can open in multiple directions. So while you're opening one section of the hips, so to speak, the inner leg line is opening for this pose. You're stabilizing, strengthening, shoring up that outer leg line. So that's a nice benefit for this pose.
Open hips, I would suggest not the right terminology.
Right.
Like you just want to say, I want hip mobility. I want some mobility and stability.
Right.
Because open feels like, your joints are just like given up and the legs can rotate really open. You want there to be the mobility, but you also want integrity in it, so you're not going into a harming posture.
Right. And this is absolutely student language because I think in their mind, open is the opposite of tight. And people don't like feeling tight. To them, the opposite of that is open. And I feel like a pose done well creates a sense of openness and spaciousness.
Yes.
But that doesn't feel dysregulated, unstable, gooey, risky.
Yeah.
And so that's a continuum that each of us are moving across, is finding just the right amount of stability to support the openness.
Yeah, I like that because you do want to feel spacious. You do want to feel like you're kind of growing from the inside out. Yeah.
This is an expansive pose.
Yeah. So we're talking about how lovely this pose feels when it's expansive. And I think most of the problems come from this feeling of collapse in this pose, right? It's like if I'm leaning on the knee joint or I'm resting in the hip joint or my core is collapsed, like it's not pleasant feeling at all.
Right. Another benefit is that side body long, which we love to talk about. How do we get more space in that lumbar spine? We get the rib cage away from the pelvis and we get the thoracic spine to move independently of the lumbar spine and pelvis, which we know by now move as a unit. So then how do we disaggregate?
That's the word I always like to use. But so I went to my doctor. I got a new doctor. I'm doing a HMO and working through anyway, he was good. I was really happy. But when I got my height, I shrunk an inch. And I was like, God damn it. I'm of the age where that happens. But I thought, this is why we want to pull the ribs and the pelvis away from each other. We want to get the side body long. And then I thought, I wonder if I wasn't doing this work if I would have shrunk more.
Right.
Yeah. So this is anti-shrinking. This is...
Right. That loss of disc height. But strengthening the back muscles and to slow down the inevitable changes that do happen. And then it improves, we brushed across this, it improves thoracic rotation, which is that rib cage, and the cervical rotation, which gets us into some of these common complaints in the pose, one of which is it's really hard to turn my head and look up.
Right. Which gets you into the alignment of the head and the posture. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing it's super good at is this is one of the 12 poses from a 10-year study on osteoporosis. So it's very good at strengthening bone density.
Yeah, specifically in the hip and in that lumbar spine, common areas of bone loss. So the common complaints are SI joint, hip joint pain, groin pain, knee pain, front ankle pain, like a collapse in the Achilles there. Any other common complaints?
I feel like all the complaints are, you can imagine the energy just going down, and like spreading out. And then I think there's a balance component. It can be really hard, especially if if you're restricted in your movement, you're not going to be able to get that imaginary plane where you're just laterally tilting.
Right. And that gets us into some of the misalignments of the trunk. Right. We'll see the people leaning forward in the pose, the chest turning towards the floor, the butt sticking out behind somebody. We'll see people not laterally tilting their pelvis. They'll be side bending in the pose. We see knees locked out backwards, the calf and the shin sinking towards the floor precipitously. Or lots of people don't straighten their leg
at all
enough in that front leg. They resist straightening it all the way, sometimes because of that hamstring intensity. And so then you're cueing as a teacher, straighten your leg. And then the hypermobile people are pushing their knee further and further back. And so people are hearing cues that are not meant for them. Yeah. Which is one of the things that we want you to get good at when you listen to this podcast is you start to understand not every cue is for you. You have to understand at a certain point your leg can straighten too far.
Exactly. Yeah.
Other common misalignments, the front knee, the front hip really is twisting in, but we'll see it at the kneecap twisting in and the front foot pronates.
Right.
The back foot tends to pronate. That's very common. The back foot tends to turn out. The front foot tends to not turn out enough. So there's a lot of like
collapse
really,
the inner leg in the back,
yeah,
and just like, collapse the arches.
Right. You don't get that sense of like sitting on a barrel and widening those inner thighs out.
Yeah. And so if you're just standing there in a wide-legged stance and then you turn your front foot out 90 degrees, kick out the back heel, and then you just tilt the pelvis and the core stays nice and long and goes with it, that is hard to do without a little bit of hip impingement too.
And then we get lots of pelvic tilt issues, people coming in with way too much anterior pelvic tilt, posterior pelvic tilt, torquing and torsioning the pelvis against itself. And then a really common one, probably the one that is a real pet peeve of mine, is when people's chests are turning towards the floor, but then they have that top arm way behind them to try to twist.
Oh, yeah. People love that feeling.
Because they're like, I'm trying to twist, but they're using their arm to twist instead of their core.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that brings us to the most controversial cue in this pose is stack your hips.
Yep.
Or between two panes of glass. They're tied. And they're kind of the same thing.
It is pretty
Stack
much the
your
same
hips
thing.
to get between two panes of glass.
Right.
So we will come back to should you stack your hips or not? And what is it about between these two panes of glass? And is that helpful or not?
Right.
But we'll start with the feet because it's a nice way to build the pose. And often teachers, one thing they can cue and have time to cue is what to do with your feet. How far apart are you standing? And where are you pointing your feet?
Okay.
Which directly affects, as you've mentioned many times, the pelvis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that connection of the foot to the sit bone.
Exactly. So a good breakdown is your wide-legged stance. Take your arms, reach them long wherever the break in the wrist is a good rule of thumb for your ankles, right? But the more important thing is, does it feel like you could pull into the midline, right? If you feel like that's so far that you're going to just kind of risk going into some splits, that's too far.
Right. So I just say to people, take the widest stance you can without losing your balance. And then I tell the hypermobile people in the room, not you, except you.
Yeah.
Make it shorter
Yeah.
than you want to. But like that would be a better way to say it, though, I think, is make it feel like you could still pull in at any point.
Yeah, because I don't make the stance on this as wide as I would for a side angle or a warrior two.
Oh, to me, I do this like in the classic Utthita Trikonasana, which is the extended. I do like the long triangle, and I actually shorten up slightly for my side angle. I always kind of wondered about that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I have a long torso and short legs, and I
Maybe.
have to like kind of bring my short legs with me to balance out that long torso.
I'll have to try it with the longer stance today in class because I don't know why I don't do that. Well, you can play with it
But
in your
that
body.
5-foot stance with your
Arms.
that's Utthita.
Okay.
I think that is Utthita Trikonasana.
Okay.
And I think that more like 3.5 foot, 4-foot stance is like and I see most students opting for a shorter triangle.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feels safer.
And then I feel like that can actually set them up for some of these hip and pelvis complaints or misalignments. I feel like that longer stance drives the outer hips in and stabilizes it a little bit more.
With the corn cobs.
Yeah, but we'll get to the hips later. Let's go back
Yeah, we're
to
starting
the feet.
to feet. And yeah.
So that front leg turns out 90 degrees from the hip, but you're seeing that front foot parallel with the long edge of the mat.
Yeah. And then the back heel kicks out.
And I love that you say this because the back heel kicking out is so much better than like turn your back foot in or it doesn't feel the same. It seems like you're saying the same thing, but if you try it in your body, kick the back heel out wider feels very different. I think maybe what it's doing on that sit bone, maybe what it's doing to reduce how much external rotation there might be because the legs have stepped so far apart. It brings that back leg a little bit more internally rotated, especially if we're allowing the pelvis to turn towards the front leg.
Which, are we in agreement you want to do that a little bit?
Yes. Rather than strictly stacking the hips, which isn't going to work as well for very wide-hipped people.
AKA women.
Right. Allowing some turn here acknowledges the fact that 90 degrees of turnout in the hip is way beyond what's anatomically available. In order not to shred the hip, we're rotating the pelvis towards the front leg.
Yeah.
The important caveat being that the ASIS, that hip point, that bone that teachers tell you to feel, when we say square the hips, if there was a headlight on each hip point pointing straight ahead, and that would help you square your hips where you're swiveling those headlights slightly towards the front leg. But the hip point should still stay inside the inner thigh of the front leg, because we don't want to then suddenly make it pyramid pose.
Right.
The leg has to be externally rotated relative to the pelvis.
It's an open hipped pose.
It's an open,
not closed
pose. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, but the feet too, you want the feet really active. You want the energy pulling up. So to the extent that you can feel the ball mount of the foot and the heel, and try to elevate the arches, drawing the energy all the way up through the arches, through the inner legs, that's going to be really helpful too. And it also prevents you from collapsing down.
Yeah, and it goes right into our myofascial lines. So the two myofascial lines that we're dealing with primarily in triangle pose are the lateral line, which extends from the underside of the foot on the outside of the leg all the way up through the abdominals that help us rotate on the side, all the way up to the muscles on the side of the neck. And then that spiral line connects the neck, wraps around under the armpit through the serratus anterior to the core, and across the abdominals to the opposite hip. And we see that relationship in that twist and stabilization effort that's happening in triangle. But that spiral line from the hip then goes down the outside of the leg and wraps under the arch of the foot and comes up the inside of the leg, forming like a jump rope, or back in the day, stirrup pants.
Yeah, those were...
Never came back, did they?
No, I think they actually have had a little...
Do they have like a blip? But they didn't. It hasn't stuck.
No, it did not stick.
So we've got that jump rope across the bottom of the foot, which is that lifting of the arch, the shortening of the arch, the heightening of the arch, which does what? It connects. It's a diaphragm.
It's a diaphragm. It connects all the way up to the pelvic diaphragm, respiratory diaphragm, the roof of the mouth. We're trying to get the whole spine to elongate and to feel supported. And that's where we start. That's a really good place to start.
Can you see how all of our episodes, all of it's
it all makes sense.
It all leads to the same themes over and over again, where it's all building and making sense.
Yeah. And these are just different ways to access that.
Yes.
The other thing that's important too with the feet is we're actively rooting into the feet, right? Mm-hmm. We're rooting down and lifting up at the same time, that oppositional forces.
Which is where we get to a variation of triangle that they often practice in Ashtanga, where you grab the big toe.
Oh, yeah, that's fun.
Of the front foot with the first two fingers, those peace fingers, some people say. And then when you pull that toe up, we're activating that windlass mechanism that creates and enhances that arch. So there's this value and the brilliance of the early yogis to understand, like, what helps me make this pose stronger, better.
Yeah. And so we're moving up the body, and we're going to come to the knees next. But one of the things, when you're talking about the big toe, I think that the enemy of this pose done well is the idea that I'm getting my hand to the floor.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it's almost like your hand gets where your hand gets after you do it.
Right, because any range of motion that you can only sustain by a death grip on a block, you are not supporting through your trunk and your hips. You're losing all the value. Whenever you use your arms to hold you up. So I don't let anyone use a block. For the last few years, nobody gets to use a block.
So they're all floating?
They're all floating, or they have a hand on a shin, and they're pushing the shin into the hand. So they're creating the stability that they're missing.
Okay.
Or the arms are over here, up in a V, and we only go over 10 degrees.
Yeah.
So that we can start to build the strength in that lateral line to support the trunk.
Yeah.
Which
makes sense.
Yeah, you can't passively get a range that you're supposed to be able to actively maintain.
Yeah. I do like that. If you've got a death grip and you're holding on, then you're practicing gripping. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing about yoga that says we need to practice more gripping.
Right. The only exception I would say is someone who's very, very new to the pose and maybe very, very unstable.
Yeah.
So then for sure you're going to have a block, or you're going to you're going to have a wall,
right,
or something that you really can just start to understand even what the shape is. Like, I don't expect people to be like paddling without a boat in the middle of the ocean if they're beginners.
Right.
But like, once you understand triangle and you've been doing it wrong for a few years, you start to let's start to do it right.
So moving up the body, we get to the knees, and knees micro bent or bent, but micro bent. Never hyperextend that joint. That's a big, common, unfortunate stance. Because people, then they like lean on that joint. It's so painful looking.
And what is the chain reaction when the thigh bone is a seesaw,
right?
And as that knee end of the bone drops towards the floor, the upper end is going forward in the hip socket, which just sets you up for the SI problems, the groin,
the impingement, all that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's devastating.
Yeah. It also really is not good for your knee.
Yeah. And it's just an escape valve that people don't know. And using that bend to also take pressure off the Achilles. So as that shin collapses down, when the knee locks back, it also compresses and wrinkles that Achilles. Sometimes people will complain of pressure there. And then all the weight drives into the heel in the pose with a pointed foot. And we talked about this in gate pose, the kind of the issues that come up with a plantar flexed ankle. When we point that foot, we're trying to get some power through the big toe ball mount. We want to stay on that big toe ball mount and reach through the big toe to lengthen that inner leg line.
I know.
To get that intention of the triangle shape.
I like to, when people tend to hyperextend and land in that knee, I love to take a block underneath the calf, and I'll have the medium height. I'll tilt it so the face of the block is connected to the calf, and that will provide this feedback into the lower leg, and it gives you a little micro bend in the knee, and it feels really good all the way up. So that's a nice way to have it feel good in your body.
Yeah, because even if you have tight hamstrings, once you open the legs really wide, it's a lot easier on the hamstrings. So it's so easy for me to hyperextend in this pose.
Yeah.
And I like to put my hand on the shin. If I'm not going to use a block, the hand will go to the shin, and I'm trying to bend my knee in every straight leg pose as the hand equally resists downwards.
Which is a similar motion.
Exactly,
right?
100%.
It's the same thing.
Yes.
It's like coming from the back or the front.
Yep.
But definitely, if your hand is on your shin is pressing into your hand.
Yeah.
And that's where you get this power.
So to prevent the collapse in these lower leg joints, using the wall and using blocks are your friend.
Yeah.
If you can position yourself with the back heel, widen the back heel and have it drive into the wall, roll towards the outer heel, push weight into the outer heel to cue the gluteal to do its job and the back leg. And it also gives such a sense of anchoring, balance, and stability.
Yeah.
And then on the front foot, it's like we did in gate pose, the same thing. We dorsiflexed the foot.
Yep.
But then we did that kind of step on the gas motion. So you could line up a block against a wall and step on the gas through the big toe ball mount to orient the correct rotations happening in the leg.
Yeah.
And to lengthen through that inner leg line as you press into the block. All very helpful. If you don't have the block there, you can just press the ball mount into the wall. And that works too.
All right. So then we're coming up to the
quads.
Yeah. And you want the quads to be lifting up. You want them to be lifting up the knees. So the upper leg is really active in this pose.
Yeah, it's a powerhouse and has to be working. And this is definitely a flaccid thigh pose. You can walk around if you're a teacher and just like poke, poke, poke from one student to the next. And the thighs are just completely flaccid. Something about it, you can lock into too many of the joints, either the hip, knee, ankle, or all of the above.
Yeah.
And pronate and collapse. And then your quads are taking the day off.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because really from the waist down, it's really active. And all of it is active lifting up, right? The quads are lifting up. The foot is lifting up.
Yeah. So maybe starting, as this pose often does, it follows a warrior two. So then when the quad's going to work much more strongly, and it kind of has to when that knee is bent deeply. Right. So then get that working in your warrior two. Get it working in a reverse warrior. In the reverse warrior, then straighten the leg, keeping the activity in the quad, then start to lean the trunk over the leg. There's lots of ways that you can sequence this. Yeah. Even a side angle pose, go into the bent leg, your trunk's already in the right position for triangle, slowly straighten the front leg, reaching through the big toe ball mount.
Right.
So clever ways to get this leg straighter in a safer way with good muscular engagement, and that muscular engagement always protects the joint.
Yep. Sounds good.